From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Welcome. Our guest today is Sabrina Siddiqui from The Guardian. Welcome, Sabrina. And on that basis, we shall go to our first issue, which is issue 1. Mr. Pompeo goes to Pyongyang.
As the Vulcans say, only Nixon could go to China. Well, perhaps only Pompeo could go to Pyongyang. After all, this week we learned that CIA Director Mike Pompeo made a secret visit to Pyongyang last week with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. What did Trump's designate for Secretary of State discuss with Kim? Trump's upcoming summit with the North Korean leader, for one.
Pat, why did the hawk go to Pyongyang?
Same reason Henry Kissinger went in July to Peking in 1971 in advance of Nixon's trip to set the whole thing up. I think Pompeo wanted to look and listen to this fellow and see if there was any way that their deal could be cut. I'm very optimistic on this. I think the North Koreans want a peace treaty. I think they want to enter the world. I think they want a lifting of sanctions that have been very tough on them. I think they're willing to give up the testing of missiles and the testing of nuclear weapons, but they ain't going to give up that bomb. That is their ticket to the dance.
Right.
Well, first of all, Pompeo is not the first spook to go to Pyongyang. James Clapper, former head of the NSA, has been there before. But it's a smart move, and every step that each side takes makes it look as though this summit might really happen. And I think the fact that Kim Jong-un traveled to Beijing, I think the Chinese leader read the riot act to him. And the Chinese are now all in, and they've been pushing what they call a freeze for a freeze. And now the North Koreans have announced they will freeze all testing on missiles. And I would assume that the U.S. part of the freeze is no military exercises. So this is well in train, and I commend the president. He saw an opening and he plunged right in.
You commend the president?
I do. On this I do. I do.
Sabrina, do you see this sort of optimism that it's Gorbachev Part 2, Perestroika, Glasnost?
Well, I think that this will help to alleviate the concerns among those who were looking at some of that more bombastic rhetoric from the president and talk of a preemptive strike from the Trump administration, that they are in fact still focused on pursuing diplomatic negotiations, and they want to exhaust all diplomatic options before engaging in any escalation. The real question will be whether or not the Trump administration can secure a firm commitment from Kim Jong-un to dismantle the nuclear and missile weapon program. And that has been what has eluded previous administrations. And the other question is, what would they ask for in return by way of concessions from the United States? And what are some of the preconditions for these talks? We talked about how they're at least willing to potentially give up the testing of the program, but will they be willing to, for example, release some of the Americans who are being held in North Korea? And those are some of the questions that the administration will have to counter before they sit down.
Clarence, what would you think the preconditions would be for the United States in terms of the first meeting? Inspector access in 72 hours?
Well, that would be admirable. I think what's interesting here is that these talks were really largely initiated by the North Koreans. They're the ones who broke the ice on this. But I give Mike Pompeo credit too. I ran to Bill Richardson the other day, who was well-known specialist on the Clinton-Obama side of the fence, and he said, I don't say this often, but the administration did a good job with this.
Before we get too excited about what might happen, this is a deal that George W. Bush could have had. It's a deal that Bill Clinton actually went ahead and made in 1994, and it got broken. And so, you know,
caution.
Confirmed.
Let me tell you, they're not going to get the North Korean Kim Jong-un to give up nuclear weapons. You're not going to get an Iranian nuclear deal where you get inspections and they go in, we make sure they got no bombs, they got no, they're not doing enrichment.
What about inspections at the ballistic missile sites?
No, look, they got to stop that. I think what you can stop is the testing of intermediate range ballistic missiles and ICBMs. But this is a problem. The Japanese are in the target range of the missiles they've got now. That's going to be a big problem. I'll tell you, I don't think Trump's going to get the final deal. And the question is, what does he do if the North Koreans say, we're not giving up all the bombs, and you're not coming into our country.
Well, you notice how Trump this past weekend said that if it's not fruitful, the talks are not fruitful, I will say thank you and leave. You know, in other words, he's saying that he's not going to take just any deal. But I think before we get involved in the particulars here, let's look at the larger picture. Why is North Korea initiating these talks? Because they want to have a closer alliance with South Korea, which the current regime wants to have a better relationship.
The bottom line is, are they going to give up the bomb? And the answer is no.
I agree, but you know, you start out wanting that, you settle for something less. And I want to give credit to the South Korean president, who is from the North. He has really initiated this as well.
Mr. Moon.
And yes, and the sister from the North who went to the Olympics. I mean, there's been a lot going on. President Trump is going to take credit for everything, but there's a lot of people who have been making this happen for some time.
That's precisely the point. This is not the first administration to go down this path and to engage in talks with North Korea, and that's why there's some risk in framing a sit-down within and of itself as a major achievement, because it could well amount to a photo op, and I think that is why there are people who are cautiously optimistic.
But let me tell you, there's a lot of Americans who would like to get our troops off the DMZ, get them out of the peninsula, get our nuclear weapons out, sign a peace treaty, and let the Japanese and the South Koreans, who are South Korea's got an economy 40 times the size of North Korea. They are capable of defending themselves.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because the North Koreans have said that they're willing to put up with American troops remaining in South Korea. But as the Americans point out, that's not even on the table. Of course, we're going to remain, and that's where things stand right now.
Okay, we're going to get on to our next issue. My concern is that the North Koreans are doing this because they basically got the ICBM now, and that holds the cards. We'll see. Hopefully peace will prevail. Anyway, issue 2, Macron to the rescue.
Addressing the European Parliament this week, President Emmanuel Macron of France lamented a, quote, civil war, unquote, style struggle in Europe between nationalism and European Union integration. And the president challenged the EU to stare down the, quote, fascination with the illiberal, unquote, and instead encourage pro-EU sentiments among its populations. But with Brexit and the recent re-election of a nationalist government in Hungary, it seems that Macron may be whistling in the wind. But note this, next week, Monsieur Macron will be enjoying a state visit to Washington, D.C. to see his friend, the president, President Donald Trump.
President Buchanan, who will win the battle for Europe's soul?
Well, the people who are winning are the ethno-nationalists. For Hungary, for example, the people of Hungary... You had this big column this week. The most priceless thing for Hungary is the preservation of an ethno-national state that represents the interests of Hungarian people. The great threat to that is mass immigration from across the Med of Arabs and Muslims and Africans. And they're going to do what is in the vital national interest of their country, as is Poland and the other countries. There's no doubt that as you look at the forces that are rising and those that are receding, it is the ethno-nationalists all over the world who are winning, and I think they're going to prevail.
Yeah, but they're winning and succeeding in what is almost a political vacuum, and I think Macron has pointed out that fewer than 50% of the French electorate voted in the last two last two turns of the parliamentary election, and he basically sounded the alarm, you know, wake up. And I do think we have an awakening in this country. Every indication is that people are much more politically aware and engaged than they have been in some time. There's more political engagement at any time than since the Vietnam War era. And so I think people are looking at Trump and how he got elected. And he got elected in part because a lot of people didn't take part in the election.
But look, what was the burning issue? Trump would never have been elected if it weren't for fear of the southern border of the United States, mass immigration.
Well, that was the turnout, but it's what a lot more people didn't turn out. A lot more people didn't turn out because they were not worried about the southern border until Trump won, and then all of a sudden said, "Oh my God, this is what happens when I don't show up and vote." And you're right that there has been a rise of ethno-nationalism around the world here in recent years, but I think it may be peaking out. Certainly. In certain countries, Hungary is thriving much more than in Germany, say, which we were first concerned about.
Sabrina, though, Clarence suggests that it's just people coming in late, but actually we see some data from California that suggests that actually there's some opposition to the sanctuary city policies of Jerry Brown. I mean, what do you think?
In Orange County.
Well, look, I think when it comes to sanctuary cities, there's a lot of mischaracterization about their intent, and they're not there to harbor criminals. They're there to create a channel between the immigrant community and law enforcement. But because you have had these crimes by undocumented immigrants elevated on this national stage, then of course that invites criticism of the policy.
What do you see about Europe?
But I think that there is, of course, a wave of nationalism that has capitalized off of this refugee crisis. And the real question when you look at that Macron speech is, what are the solutions then to reinvigorate this this commitment to the EU? And he talked about a monetary fund like the IMF. He talked about a monetary fund like the IMF, where some of the countries would take on greater burden. I don't think that a lot of other countries in Europe would go for it.
And the EU and things like that do not engage the heart. Let's take Erdogan. What did he say? He said, democracy is a bus that you get off of when it reaches your stop. He represents the Turkish people. What is the great conflict the Turkish people have now? It's against the Kurds, an ethno-national state.
170 Turkish journalists in jail right now.
He's fighting that. These are the struggles all over the world. You go to Kenya, the Kikuyu versus the Maasai versus the Luo. Ethno-nationalism is the most powerful force on the earth right now. And the, quote, EU.
And there's powerful forces pushing back. And in this country, namely the courts in this country, the three-judge court in Chicago just ruled that you cannot punish localities for having sanctuary cities.
What's happening to the courts?
There are three Republican-appointed judges, and
one of them
escaped with her parents from Latvia and has her green card from 1939 on her wall.
But look at Poland.
That is our heritage. That is our values. And
look at Poland.
Ethno-nationalism is not going to wash over that.
Look at Poland. Look at Poland. Quickly. What are the Poles are under fire from the EU? Why? Because they want to change the courts. These driving forces, I know they're not dominant here in the United States, but all over the world, and this is what's rising in Europe. Why is Macron making it?
All right. Sabrina, come in.
Well, I was going to say that I think in some ways Brexit has underscored the challenges of actually leaving the EU in practice, where Theresa May has still not determined exactly how they would continue to engage and benefit from the EU markets. And that's why Macron delivered that message that there will be no cherry picking. You cannot just go on down a bilateral path and still benefit from the EU.
Ethno-nationalists are like the dog that caught the car. They have no idea what to do.
And there are demographic things here. I mean, the younger generation in Britain, most of them were against Brexit, so we shall see on that. Anyway, when we come back, Haley's in trouble and Arbe in sunshine. And tell your friends they can watch us anytime from Sunday 1 p.m. Eastern, not Western, at our website, McLaughlin.com. We'll be back in a moment.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. Is your company trying to provide health and retirement benefits to workers across the country? The ERISA Industry Committee beats back taxes, mandates, and compliance burdens that make it harder for companies to provide employee benefits. Learn how Eric supports large employers at Eric.org.
Issue 3, sanctioning Haley.
The White House rebuked U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley this week after Haley announced new sanctions on Russia last Sunday. In fact, no new sanctions were forthcoming. So why Haley's error? Well, White House economic advisor and McLaughlin Group alumni Larry Kudlow in particular said it was because Haley was confused. The ambassador, however, disagrees. She responded, quote, "With all due respect, I don't get confused," end quote.
Sabrina, why did Nikki Haley get out ahead of the White House, and what does it mean for her?
Well, the fact of the matter is, according to most sources, there was agreement from the president that they were going to implement a new round of sanctions against Russia as in retaliation for its support of Assad's chemical weapons program. Now, the president ultimately changed his mind, and that is what happens with this president. He's very unpredictable. You know, it was going to be Secretary Mnuchin's sanctions to roll out, but at the end of the day, the challenge here is that the administration is not speaking as one voice, and especially on an issue as critical as foreign policy. When they're contradicting each other, it undermines Nikki Haley in a very prominent position as the ambassador to the UN.
Wait. I want to ask Sabrina one other question. How do you read the president's tweets yesterday about Michael Cohen? Curveball question.
Well, I think that you saw the president breaking his silence yesterday about Michael Cohen, saying that the media is trying to get him to flip amid all of these legal troubles that has the president and his legal team very concerned. He's denouncing a lot of the news around his relationship with Michael Cohen as fake news. More importantly, the reason this is important is outside of the special counsel's investigation into Russian interference, the president's legal team is a lot more concerned with the Cohen investigation because of some of the nature of the criminal charges, and specifically what the president may or may not have known about these payments that were made, for example, to Stormy Daniels.
Okay. So he brought Rudy Giuliani on board to send a signal that now I'm all lawyered up good, I have your back. Okay.
Let's get back to Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
Look, what is the main grounds on which Trump is attacked? That he's a wimp on Russia, he won't stand up to Putin. And what is she doing? She stands up and gives it all this rough rhetoric and gets in his face. She is scoring off of Trump and appealing in a certain way to the never-Trumpers. And he knows that and he sees that. And I think she's crawling out on a limb that I've seen White House aides and cabinet officers crawl out on before.
Well, there's already buzz that she and Pence have had some secret cabal.
But that's sitting well in the Oval Office.
Running for president.
But I'm surprised there's not a T-shirt yet. Maybe there already is. I don't get confused. That's going to be her calling card for whatever higher office she pursues.
Well, the fact is, Trump sounds confused. I mean, he, on the one hand, says I've been tougher on Russia than anybody. No, he hasn't. These sanctions, even, this is an example where he could have been tough, but no, he goes and undercuts his own UN ambassador.
See, that is exactly what Nikki Haley's appealing to. Clarence is praising her and dumping on Trump. And he watches that all weekend, and it could be a tough situation.
He better be watching that.
What do you think? You think maybe the fact that she was kind of walked out there on the plank and tried to.
Well, you know, she played really. I stand up to Putin and the Russians. Gets all this applause.
Yeah, but he fires her. What little standing he has among females will plummet.
And sensible people, for that matter. Nikki Haley's popular. She's a very popular person.
There is some truth to this, though, because this was one of his main issues with Steve Bannon. He doesn't like, the president does not like to be overshadowed by someone else. And there has been a great deal of criticism that he is not, in fact, pursuing a very tough line against Russia. This, of course, now reinforces that notion, enables Nikki Haley to really appeal to the more neoconservative plank of the Republican Party.
And who do the neoconservatives not like? They cheer her.
Well, but there is
neoconservatives are kind of somewhat abandoned.
I suspect, though,
and Pence is sort of the invisible man off to the
side,
just
invisible.
hovering.
Well, I do think, though, in the coming week, we are going to see, because of what the Russians will be doing and trying to prevent inspectors getting into the Duma site. Nikki Haley knows about that from her intelligence briefings. That could be a driver for new sanctions?
She better not get out too far ahead of the president and the White House, especially the president, and basically setting up her own show.
How do you read the Cohen stuff?
Yeah.
The Cohen stuff?
Yeah, the status of the investigation.
I think that guy's in trouble.
Do you think he's going to flip on is Trump in trouble?
You know, I don't see where Trump is impeached. I look down the road and I see all these problems, but I see this thing ending in Democrats controlling the House next year and saying, are we going to go down this road? It's going to be a mess. And politically, the right can win that battle.
Eleanor, what about
besides, Trump will have enough trouble with a Democratic Congress if that's the case, so he might be neutralized anyway. You're right. The impeachment thing has been overblown. The fact is, Trump needs to be neutralized as far as.
And what about the DNC lawsuit?
If you don't have 67 votes in the Senate, impeachment is a fool's errand.
Right.
I think the DNC lawsuit is kind of a distraction.
Do you think Paris made a mistake?
It tends to make the whole thing look partisan, and it
I
plays
disagree.
into Trump's hands.
That could open it all. I mean, these civil suits in Watergate, you get everybody in, everybody's under oath, stuff is dumped all out, and it could go for the other side. The folks defending Trump.
If they can get the tax returns, I'm all for it.
All right, Sabrina. closing
I was just
comment?
going to say that the lawsuit is a similar tactic as you saw in Watergate, where ultimately a settlement was reached the day that Nixon left office. But at the same time, it does make it look partisan. The special counsel's investigation will also uncover a lot of the same evidence.
Right.
And so at a time when there is this notion that there's bias within the FBI, that's alliance being perpetrated by the Trump administration, this may not help the cause in framing this as an independent and thorough
The
investigation.
DNC and the server.
You don't want to frame the midterms as a referendum on impeachment. It has to be a referendum on Trump.
In that civil suit,
stay away from impeachment.
The others, this is not
Quickly.
all going to be all negative on Trump.
Right.
The people that got the, go after Comey's going to be in there. McCabe's going to be in there. They're going to
DNC server.
Steele's going to be in there. The whole gang.
All right.
Wide open.
Those are the good
All right.
guys.
We're going on. We're moving on. All right. All right. Issue 4. Abe.
We're going to be discussing trade with Japan. We are going to be discussing military. We're going to be discussing security.
President Trump welcomed Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to Mar-a-Lago, Florida this week. On the agenda was North Korea's nuclear and missile program, China's militarization of the South and East China Seas, and President Trump's openness to rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, trade agreement. But for Abe, who leads a nation of 130 million people and retains a nearly $69 billion annual trade surplus with the United States, the Florida sunshine also offered a welcome respite. The Japanese Prime Minister is under domestic pressure in relation to a number of scandals.
Clarence, is President Trump going to be able to get Mr. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, to sign up to TPP in a reformed sense?
Isn't it interesting that Trump now wants people to sign up to TPP? He was
he
so
wants
dead
them
set
to,
against
they're
it
already in,
as
but he
a
wants to reform
candidate.
them.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is, U.S.-Japanese relations boil down to the same as the rest of the world. Abe is trying to figure out what is on Trump's mind at a given moment, as are the rest of us. You're right. He's got domestic concerns with his own credibility with the voters. He's got North Korea right across the water. He's got he's got Trump across the big water. But I think our relations are good, on a positive track. All of these issues can be dealt with rationally.
Right.
And Japan knows that they're a valuable partner to us as well.
Do you think Japanese deference, the politeness of the Japanese culture as it stands today, helps with President Trump?
What's even more important is flattering President Trump. The Japanese knew
Abe,
that early on. The Chinese knew it early on.
Abe is more unpopular at home than Trump is unpopular here. That may give them some sort of a bond.
Trump says he's popular here.
Japanese got a real long-term problem. You're going to have a nuclear North Korea, and it's going to be ratified. And they've got an economy 100 times the size of North Korea and no nuclear weapons.
Aging
and
population.
Are the Americans, they're going to ask themselves, how good is this American guarantee we've got? I think the Japanese have, and of course they're depopulating to a degree.
They need immigrants, Pat. They need immigrants.
They don't allow them. They're an ethno-national state.
And you see what has brought them now.
All right.
Sabrina. I think the biggest challenge for Shinzo Abe going into this meeting was that Japan risks being sidelined amid unprecedented talks with North Korea, as well as at a pivotal moment on U.S. trade policy. But it wasn't a successful trip for him. If you look at the scandals that he's facing back home, he had to come back with some kind of win. He was not able to secure an exemption from Trump's tariffs on steel imports, nor was he able to, not yet, nor was, they may change, but not yet, nor was he able to, in the near term, convince the president to re-engage in the TPP. So I don't think
and to take a tougher line on North Korea.
And to take a tougher line on North Korea. So I don't think he may have alleviated a lot of the troubles he faces back home.
No, I mean, I think the Japanese have reason to be nervous, and they're overshadowed by China, and they know China is basically driving the talks with North Korea. So
I think my friend is right.
Very good, very good. A communion of spirits. Well, I also think here, who's hiding behind the scenes here? Xi Jinping telling the North Koreans, just get Trump in there so he doesn't tariff us even more. We're persuading him.
He wants a deal. He wants a deal, Xi Jinping, sure.
Well, but he
doesn't want a war in the peninsula, and he doesn't want the Americans.
He also wants Trump's gratitude, though, so that Trump doesn't push back against the South China Sea stuff.
They've all figured out flattery is the way you get Trump on board.
It doesn't take long to
it doesn't, that doesn't take long.
It does go a long way.
They're not giving up the South China Sea. I think they've got it, Tom.
You think it's done?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it finally got through to Trump that TPP is a good check on the Chinese. It's not something that gives them an advantage.
He says that when he's before somebody who wants to hear it, but then he pulls back from that right away. And I don't know that you can re-enter that and get a better deal. They're not good. 12 nations are not going to renegotiate to satisfy him. So I'm afraid that that train's left the station.
And he's not that good of a negotiator either. Way overblown.
But he now may realize that that was the biggest gift to China.
Sure
and Abe had actually
was.
been a strong opponent of the U.S. trying to re-enter the TPP at a later stage, but then you had Trump standing next to him talking about the potential for pursuing bilateral trade agreements, and I think now he's in a position where he's being backed into a corner. He may have to
And you got the economic nationalists
on
will be
US
heard
terms.
from if he goes for TPP, and they'll be heard from loud and clear.
And how many?
And he knows that.
How many of them are there?
Right?
They put him in the White House, didn't they?
Oh, that's a good retort. That's a good retort.
But they're also losing ground because of tariffs and so forth.
But, you know, you go back to that, you'll split the Republican Party apart.
Policies.
All right, here's a little pop quiz question. Who's coming for a state visit next week?
Macron.
Macron, Mr. Macron. Anyone here going to the state dinner?
My invitation is
My
still
invite
in
got
mail.
lost in the mail.
He read my column, and I'm not going.
Sadly mine did as well. We shall return forthwith, bearing predictions.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Predictions, Pat.
I think the Iranians are going to respond to the Israelis who attacked their base in Syria. And I think here at home, this is one of the reasons why you're going to see a real push on the Hill and from Republicans to keep American troops inside Syria.
Eleanor.
With anxiety growing that the president may yet move to fire Rod Rosenstein and or Jeff Sessions and or Mr. Mueller, the Democrats and Republicans too can use the narrow majority, the one-seat majority that Republicans have with confirmations, wow, that John McCain is not there, to basically force Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, to put bipartisan legislation to a vote to protect Mueller.
Sabrina.
Well, I think that there's been a lot of focus on these special elections and whether they're indicative of what's to come in November, but I think talk of a potential blue wave is premature. I think actually a lot of the overconfidence risks complacency, and so I don't think it is by any means a shoo-in for Democrats to retake the House, let alone the Senate.
Okay.
But Trump seems to be doing all he can to encourage a blue wave.
What's your prediction?
So happening so far. Paul Ryan, outgoing Speaker of the House, says it's his final wish to get entitlement reform. He will not get his wish.
Okay, sad. I know. I wish we had entitlement reform. I predict that Mike Pompeo will scrape through the Senate confirmation process and head across the Potomac as Secretary of State. And here's a random fact. 103 years ago today, the Second Battle of Ypres began in Belgium. It would be the first time that German forces employed chlorine gas as a strategic weapon. Tens of thousands would die in that month-long battle, as tens of thousands, well, 100 millions actually, died in the First World War. Anyway, thank you very much, panelists, for an enjoyable discussion. Arbe issue might have been a bit too long, but anyway. We hope you'll join us next week, but make sure to follow us on Twitter at McLaughlin Group and visit our webpage, McLaughlin.com, where your friends can watch this show. See you next week with better prompter reading from me. Bye-bye.